Welcome to the Parent Advocate Podcast, a show where we celebrate, defend, support, and uplift the voices of the LGBTQIA community. I'm your host, Stephen Chkumba. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm joined by my amazing co-host, Lisette Trujillo.
Hi everyone, Lisette here, she, her, Aya. The mission of the Parent Advocate Podcast is to elevate conversations and reframe narratives around trans and non-binary youth to help change hearts and minds. Each week we bring you our take on all things happening from the perspective of two parents of BIPOC transgender kids.
Lisette, I have got to tell you, I feel like today's episode is going to be really, really special.
I couldn't agree more, Stephen. I'm really, really excited to have our show bring on this young man who exemplifies all the things that trans advocacy should exemplify.
And I can't wait to talk to them. So welcome everyone once again to the Parent Advocate Podcast. Let's get started. Lisette, this week has been so much. And I mean so much because it's been so much. Like, I had a random visit from one of my dads from my Asbury Park Fathers Group come by, and we just sat in the kitchen drinking tea, going off about how fucked up everything is. And this is like a white dude of privilege who's traveled the country. He spent time in Bolivia. He lived with indigenous people. He's basically doing the Lord's work. And he and I were both like, what the fuck is going on in this country right now? It's hard to put to words what I'm feeling. I feel like I'm experiencing PTSD all the time.
And what's interesting is, like, I thought we had emotionally prepared for it because we've been told for almost a year now that this is coming. Right? This is the goal. It's going to come. But it felt like a slow moving car crash, right? Like you know it's coming, you're bracing for impact, but you're not prepared. And I think that's what yesterday felt like for so many parents. Their worst fear, have just the bottom fell out, as they would say. And it's hard to process what's real, what to be worried about, and what's not a possibility in this moment, right? What parents should really focus on and what they shouldn't be afraid of.
But the fucked up thing is, like, it's supposed to be the holiday season. We're supposed to be celebrating the birth of our Lord Jesus Christ. We're supposed to be experiencing Yuletide joy, gift giving, and the joys and wonders of being with family. We had snow the other day and it was a white wonderland. But at the same time, we have families who are literally terrified that their children will not be able to go to the doctor anymore, that they will not be able to get the care that they need, that they will be looking at clinics and hospitals shutting down and the care that they have come to rely on going away. All at the same time, we're supposed to be joyously celebrating the holidays. Like, how can you do those? The cognitive dissonance is really, really quite jarring.
And to hear the president prioritize the celebration of 250 years with the Patriot Games, which is like some weird mesh of like Hunger Games and gladiatorship, and then saying where men won't be playing in women's sports, like, what? I felt like I'm in a different wrong timeline.
It literally is like the Twilight Zone.
It's like Jesus take the wheel, but he didn't take us where we wanted to go.
Jesus jumped out of the car a long time ago. Didn't you see him doing a tuck and roll back there? He said, Jesus is not in this vehicle. We are in a driverless vehicle, and it's probably a fucking Tesla because they fucking crash like a fucking no man's business. It's crazy. This timeline we're on, honestly, is bizarro land. Literally, it's like the metaverse in the worst possible way. And I don't even understand. Like, honestly, what was that speech? What was that? What was he doing? What was he babbling on about? What are any of them babbling on about? They get on these podiums and they put press in front of them, and then they just talk gibberish.
I know. This is why I tell you it felt like a fever dream, because it was like a 20-minute incoherent speech that I stayed up until 3 a.m. to watch because I was worried he was gonna announce war with Venezuela. But
that's coming.
This whole week, Stephen, I've had the flu. Then we had all this avalanche of anti-trans essentially trying to use two levers of government to essentially eliminate gender-affirming care across the country. And then in Europe, you're hearing rumblings of potential war, right? Where like the EU is saying we may experience the war of their grandparents. And I'm like, the war of your grandparents or your great grandparents was like World War II. And so the world feels like it's on fire and it feels like no place is safe for anyone. And I know that it's the holidays and people want to feel secure and safe and together. And how do you do that in the midst of chaos? I don't know.
I don't know either, but I think it's probably time for us to like really get into what this chaos is and not skirt about it. So let's start off this trifecta of fuckery that we got this week, beginning with the bounty that Pam Bondi instructed the FBI to issue against essentially advocates for transgender equality. This follows September's announcement that we talked about a few months ago about this new category of terrorists, this nihilistic extremists, who again are just people supporting trans people. And now it appears that they've ratcheted up this rhetoric by empowering ordinary citizens to essentially rat on their neighbors. You see a pride flag, call into the FBI. You see somebody basically painting a rainbow on the sidewalk, call into the FBI. If you hear a person using their pronouns, call into the FBI. They've put up $50 million for information leading to the identification and arrest and prosecution, presumably, of people who engage in transgender ideology. I'm like, what in the absolute fuck is going on? We have actual terrorists. We actually have white nationalists, white Christian nationalists plotting bombings, plotting murders, selling fentanyl, like doing all types of heinous, horrible things. We have pedos trafficking children in front of our very eyes. We have evidence of this cabal of rich white men selling children to one another. We have the actual receipts in bank accounts in JP Morgan Chase. Like, we actually know who they are, where they are, what they did, what they transacted, the ages of the children. And instead of going after those people, let's find those fucking parents who are saying, you know what? I hear you, kid. I believe you. You are a transgender, gender expansive child. I'm going to take you to the doctor and I'm going to make sure you get the best care that's out there, because that's the most dangerous thing that's happening in this country right now.
You know, Stephen, I went to one of our neighbors' houses because they had like a meal, right, with people from all over the world. These weren't all Americans. These were people from like Jamaica, Netherlands. Like, there were a few Americans there, me included. And this one woman was like, you know, after talking to you, Lisette, and hearing your story, I asked one of my friends what she felt about supporting trans youth. And she went off and said parents should be criminalized and imprisoned. And I'm like, the rhetoric is so strong against us right now, where I thought it would be impossible for them to come after parents, really. And now I worry for so many of our trans loved ones who've been advocating for so long, advocating for their own dignity and well-being and safety and protections. And then I worry for all the parents out there who are continuing to advocate like we are. I worry about the dads. Like, I mean, they could say anything and we can't be deterred. We can't be afraid because that's what they want.
That's what they want. And that's the part that really has me like, oh, you motherfuckers got me confused. You must think that I'm just some, oh no, they're gonna criminalize my behavior. Fuck you. Fuck you and the horse you rode in on. I wish a motherfucker would show up at my door with an arrest warrant because I support my kid. Get the fuck out of here. And that's the part that I need parents who are listening to this show to hear. Be defiant. Fuck these assholes. They're trying to make you scared. This is the plan. Because once again, if you obey in advance, if you hospital close your doors, if you doctor turn away patients, they are getting exactly what they want. This bounty that they're putting out for fucking what? What are you doing? What do you think you're doing, Pam Bondi? What do you think you're doing, Cash Patel? Instead of going after actual criminals, you're coming after me. Come with it. Come with it, you fucktards.
I agree, 1,000%. And I also want to bring up this other part of the trifecta that I still can't wrap my head around, which is how the House of Representatives voted to advance Marjorie Taylor Greene's hateful bill to the Senate. The fact that Johnson made some sort of backdoor compromise to get her bill out of committee and onto the floor for a full vote, and then having 3 Democrats vote for it and four Republicans vote against it. Had those 3 Democrats not voted, we wouldn't be afraid of this bill right now.
Say that shit again. Say that shit again.
3 Democrats voted yes, 4 Republicans voted no. Again, a timeline. Jesus jumped out of the car. We're rolling alone on this awful fucking terrain. And the Democrats fucked us. But I will say, I got a call from one of my really good friends, and they were like, look at the 4 no votes as a silver lining because that's never happened before. And so maybe this is a crack. What do you think?
I mean, I was pleased to know that there are 4, at least on this issue, that have a conscience. I'm not going to give them any more credit than that because we got to this point by these feckless elected officials acting in feckless fashions, enabling this fucking fucked up administration to do all the fucked up shit that has gotten us to this point so far. And so I am only going to give you so much credit because only so much credit is deserved at this point. And I am disgusted. I'm beyond disgusted with the Democrats who continually disappoint, who continually fold in the most critical moment, at the most critical time, for the most critical issues, for seemingly no payoff. What have you gained? And for the people who were like, oh, it's not likely going to pass the Senate, this shit shouldn't have made its way to the fucking House floor. So don't sit here and tell me that there's no way it's going to pass in the Senate because you can't guarantee that. You don't know that. Our politicians are fucked. There's very few of them that anyone should trust as far as they can throw them. And seriously, I've heard Chase say it. I've heard countless trans people say it. The politicians, the government will not save us. And so any solution that involves these elected officials doing the right thing is a solution I'm not putting my money in. I'm just not. It doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense because in the past 10 months, they failed us. In the Biden administration, they failed us. In the administration before that, they failed us. They've been failing us consistently since like 2014. And I'm saying 2014 because that is when these things started to crop up in states across the country. And so while I may be talking right now about the federal failures, I am also talking about the state after state failures that have preceded the moment that we're currently in. So I cannot tell you how fucking disgusted I am with the House of Representatives, with people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, with the Hawleys of the world. Like, I cannot tell you how disgusted I am with the people who form their lips to say they're doing this to protect children when what they are actually doing is harming children. My child will be harmed by this. Your child will be harmed by this. The countless minor children who may potentially lose care will be harmed like this. The silver lining for me is that there are practitioners, there are clinics, there are endocrinologists who are in private practice who do not require Medicaid or Medicare funding in order for their practices to survive and thrive. And so those are the last bastions of hope for the care that our children will need. That's what I consider the silver lining. But wait, Lisette, there are more. The coup de grace of this trifecta of fuckery is that today marks the beginning of the 90-day comment period for the Department of Health and Human Services' latest rulemaking fakakta, which is that Medicaid and Medicare, hospitals that accept federal funding, will no longer be able to provide gender-affirming care to minors. The CHIP program will no longer be able to support puberty blockers or hormone therapies or surgeries, which I have to add with a fucking asterisk. Surgeries on minors is extremely rare and only authorized in the most extreme circumstances of dysphoria. I need to say that again because all this talk about childhood mutilation, it's not fucking happening. Using the word mutilation to describe any surgery that is authorized by a medical provider and desired by the actual patient is not mutilation. That is not mutilation. We are not talking about the bushes of Africa where children are involuntarily, non-consensually having their privates sewn up to prevent their virginity from being taken. That's not what we're fucking talking about here. We're talking about a surgery or surgeries that are authorized by the medical providers, by the care teams for these children to avoid harm to the children, to avoid a child experiencing mental distress or causing themselves physical harm because what they see on the outside doesn't match who they are on the inside. And so I am sick to my core about the fact that hospitals across the country who almost universally rely on Medicare and Medicaid function, who provide care for all of their patients, will now have to choose whether or not to support this small group of people or keep their doors open. And
Yeah.
we all know what the decision is going to be.
And Stephen, when we're talking about minors who receive gender affirming care surgery, we're talking about 16 and up, right? Like, for the most part, you're talking about a 16-year-old, so who's 2 years away from being what they call age of maturation. But yet, in some states, kids can marry at the age of 12 with parental consent. That shit's the shit that blows my mind. The way in which they've manipulated and hijacked the narrative to tell a story that is not true and that is scientifically inaccurate, and it's meant to push their agenda. It makes no sense that they're trying to make sense of the Jeffrey Epstein list and the girls on there being 15 and so therefore not truly minors. And yet we'll continue to talk about childhood mutilation without any sense of irony when they're talking about access to care for trans youth. It's a bunch of fucking hypocrisy.
It is that. And the thing that's so crazy about this all is that we know as parents of trans children that we're not going to allow any doctor, any care provider, anybody do anything untoward to our children. We are not going to allow our children to be harmed by any procedure, surgical or otherwise. So to think that parents across this country of gender expansive children are just allowing people to mutilate our children, when a doctor decides that an intersex child is going to be a boy or a girl and therefore engages in a surgical procedure without the parent's consent, that is childhood mutilation. When a doctor decides to circumcise a child, that is childhood mutilation. That surgery is completely unnecessary. The child does not want their foreskin clipped. The child doesn't want you to decide whether or not they're a boy or a girl, because for you, what the more aesthetically pleasing thing is what you're going to do. So if you're going to talk about when practitioners, when doctors should have criminal penalties assigned to their behavior, talk about those instances. Don't talk about the year plus timeline that preceded the actual scheduling of this particular surgical procedure in consult with the actual patient and their parents before it was done, with a full disclosure of what the potential positive and negative outcomes are going to be, as well as all the mental health prerequisites that precede that activity. Like, that is what's required for these surgeries to take place. And for you to just think it's some willy-nilly thing that needs to now criminalize doctors' conduct in these instances, it fucking blows my mind.
We as parents, because we've wanted to keep our children's medical care private, as it should be, and not open it up for debate, it's really allowed the opposition, right, to kind of snatch the narrative and put out so much misinformation that we can't even, it's not even worth sometimes even arguing back, right? Because it's just so false. And, you know, I shared something on Facebook last night because I've used that platform for the last decade to share accurate information. And I've also shared my child and his life in hopes that people would see him grow into himself and that they would say, oh, I don't need the details on how that happened. I trust that this kid who's doing so well was supported and received the things that he needed in order to thrive in this world. And I think a lot of the debate around gender affirming care is just from people who just are fucking hateful, who aren't going to care either way. They don't really care. They just want to be haters.
That's true. But Lisette, I think our guest today, who is a young trans person, can give us some perspective for how this week is impacting the trans community and what we can do to survive these times. So how about we get to our guest?
I'm so excited to talk to him.
Today's guest is a trans youth activist and a youth council member for the Massachusetts Commission on LGBTQ youth. He is a senior in high school who is planning on attending college next fall and majoring in political science. An accomplished public speaker and advocate, Brett enjoys sharing his journey with others and hopes that through his public advocacy and storytelling, he will be able to raise awareness about the importance of supporting transgender people and their families and the life-saving value of gender-affirming care for minors. A recent recipient of the Youth in Action Award from the Massachusetts Commission on LGBTQ youth, Brett is committed to continuing his advocacy after high school as he pursues his professional aspirations. Everyone, please welcome Brett to our show.
Welcome to the show, Brett. We're so happy you could join us today.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
All right, Brett, I have the first question. Stephen tells me that you are a trans youth activist like my son Daniel, And so our first question has to be what inspired your activism?
So there's one activist in Massachusetts. His name is Skylar Baylor. He does a lot of work for the trans community. He swam for Harvard, and so he kind of became an activist through that as a trans guy. I remember I went to a trans event where I saw him speaking, and for a long time I kind of had a lot of anger in me because of just everything that's going on is pretty crappy. But seeing him speak, I noticed that he had like a really awesome like zen to him almost. And so I kind of aspired to have that same kind of zen. And I figured that maybe public speaking would be that key for me. So that's kind of how I ended up getting into it. And I was able to get in contact with enough people that I was able to start with the commission and do public speaking through them. So it was mostly Skylar that got me started, as well as just kind of seeing everything that's bad going on, kind of being able to feel like you have control over it, even though a lot of the time you don't, is nice. I think that answering people's questions in an environment where it's inappropriate to get mad is nice and therapeutic.
So, Brett, you and I met. In fact, I met your entire family in
hmm
Boston at the book launch of Rebecca Miner's book,
hmm
Raising Trans Kids: What to Expect When You Weren't Expecting This. And one of the things that your dad and I talked about really briefly was about how you are defining yourself not by gendered expectations necessarily. We were talking about just, what it is to raise boys and what it is to raise a young man and all these other things. And your dad was like, yeah, he never really needed that from me. He had a very deep sense of understanding of who he was. And so, can you talk about how important it is for parents to respect their children's sense of identity and allow them to come to that sense of self without placing those expectations on them?
Yeah, I think that what's important to know is that nobody knows anyone better than somebody knows themselves. And so kind of allowing them to be themselves is important because being authentic is great and it feels great and anyone cis or trans knows that. And so I think it's important to allow especially trans kids to kind of flourish and be themselves because a lot of the time they didn't have that opportunity when they were younger. If they were toddlers when they came out or if they were teens when they came out or even older, a lot of the time they had a period of time where they didn't necessarily feel comfortable to be their authentic self. And so allowing them to kind of make up for that time is really important. And it's also something where it's just, like I said before, it's nice to be yourself around people that you know and love. And so kind of allowing them to continue that, to continue or to start that is it's very important in allowing your kid to feel joyful and thrive, especially if they're in a place where they may feel not great, if they have depression or anxiety because of the way that the world is currently. Allowing them to be authentic kind of allows for a non-expensive way to not necessarily solve those problems, but definitely help to mend them.
Yeah, that's super important. Your dad shared a video of your acceptance speech for the award Stephen just mentioned in your intro, where you said that you want people to ask questions, even the awkward ones. Why do you feel it's important to make space for people to ask often personal and intrusive questions of you?
Well, I think a lot of the time people feel uncomfortable asking those questions, like I said in the speech. And so a lot of the time people don't get those questions answered, and it's just kind of sitting on their mind. I also said in my speech that I think that a lot of the reason for this hatred is kind of misunderstanding. And I think that a lot of those awkward questions that people are afraid to ask is the key to kind of finding that understanding. It's one of those things where it's like even asking something, as personal but not like body personal as like, why are you trans? It's important, and a lot of people don't feel comfortable asking those questions because they are afraid of like cancellation or something like that, even though it's just something where I think a lot of people have fears of. And so being an outlet to ask those questions is important. And I don't think that everybody should be those outlets. I think that people should have the autonomy to be like, okay, I want to take a step back. I don't want to answer these questions. And that's just kind of for just generally everything. But especially I think it's important in this case where I think a lot of the time too, people are afraid to ask those questions out of fear of making the person themselves uncomfortable. And that's very valid. And so kind of allowing them to ask those questions in specifically a space where they are encouraged to ask those questions is important to kind of let them feel comfortable in asking those questions, even though they are uncomfortable questions.
All right. So, Brett, when I spoke to your parents yesterday about having you on the show, we had just learned about the U.S. House of Representatives passage of a bill that would essentially criminalize doctors for providing gender affirming care to
Mhm.
transgender minors under 18 across the country. When you hear about this type of legislation, how does it make you feel? And what do you want people to know about the ways in which these types of legislative acts, whether they're on a federal level or a state level, impact trans youth and trans people generally?
To answer the first question about how it makes me feel, for lack of a better word, it makes me feel shitty. It's not very great to hear, oh, you can't get healthcare because people don't understand you and your identity. I started medication about a year ago for depression just because of everything that's been going on. I wasn't depressed previously, but after things started, taking its course, things started getting a little bit worse. So I started taking medication. After that, things have kind of just like gone over my head. That medication has been very helpful for me. But it's still like when I hear of this kind of news, it's crappy to hear that. Like other people that may not have access to this medication. It's one of those things where I know a lot of trans people and I know a lot of trans people that are my age, and knowing that they cannot get the medical care that they need, it kind of sucks, especially for a lot of them are kind of in the process of figuring it out since they are almost 18, and so it's a lot more acceptable socially for them to start getting that kind of care.
What do you want people to know about the impact of these types of legislation on trans people, trans youth in particular?
For me specifically, my hormones, and I've had top surgery, which is considered very controversial, but is something that's been essential for me. This shirt, for example, I wouldn't be wearing it if I didn't have top surgery. It's a tighter shirt, it's a tighter fitting shirt, and testosterone has given me like a massive mental health boost, has made me feel much more confident than I used to feel. And so hearing about this legislation and finding out that other kids are not able to kind of get that care really sucks. And on a more personal level, it's scary to know, okay, I may not be able to get my hormones next month because people that, once again, don't understand me or my identity are calling the shots on what is and isn't appropriate for my body, even though they don't know me. A lot of these people don't know any trans people or aren't aware of the fact that they know trans people. And so it's really crappy to hear that these people who don't know anything are the ones being like, okay, you can't have that. And I think that it's
Facts.
important that we have conversations like this where we are having conversations actively with the people who are impacted by this legislation, because otherwise, like, your whole job is to represent the people, and you're not doing that if you're not actually listening to them. So I think that conversations like this are really important to kind of halt that and to create understanding. That's kind of my hope with the speaking that I'm doing, is to create a more broad understanding, especially in terms of trans youth, where we don't have a lot of the same representation as trans adults. And a lot of the time when we are represented, it's by trans adults. And a lot of the time, they don't even have an understanding necessarily. There's a lot of things going on right now that are just like confoundingly crappy.
It's true. I mean, you raise a very valid point because we've never seen this level of legislative attack against the trans community as we're seeing now. Between, let's just say, 2016 and now, we've seen more efforts, state and federal, to criminalize, legislate away rights for trans people. And it's unprecedented because people who are trans elders today, they had different kinds of fights. I will certainly say that the fights were materially different than those that you are suffering. And it's not like anyone had like a cakewalk, but this level of coordinated, super well financed, dark money attacks on trans people is brand new. And
Mhm.
I don't think anyone can speak on behalf of trans youth about how this is impacting them as well as trans youth can. So I really thank you for sharing that. Lisa,
Yeah.
I know that was your question to ask, but I just had to double click on that point.
What I really appreciate you saying in your initial response is, I did not feel anxious or depressed until I began to hear rhetoric and feel potential impact of harmful policy. And I think when we're having conversations as parents, as trans youth, and I want to preface for listeners who are hearing us talk about trans youth, when we talk about access to care, we're talking about age appropriate,
Yes.
care for trans adolescents, right?
Hmm.
Oftentimes when I'm advocating, I'm talking about my child, right? But he's no longer a child, right? So
Hmm.
we don't have like names for our kids as they age. And so I just want our listeners to understand, like, as you, Brett, say kid, we're talking about adolescents, right? That are of an age of maturity where access to care makes sense developmentally. And so I think it's really important when we talk about this is that trans youth do not have to be the story that is constantly told. We know that youth who are affirmed, who are supported, don't necessarily have high levels of suicidality, dysphoria. Like those are things that can be through care. And I think what you're saying is so, so important. And so I'm sure that the more and more you speak openly and the more and more you share your story, you probably have a lot of youth who are coming to you. What do you want to tell them in this moment as you're struggling? Like, what's your advice for them?
For youth, it's a fine line because I would encourage youth who feel available enough mentally to start doing advocacy. And there's many different forms of advocacy. It doesn't just have to be public speaking. There can also be a lot of behind the scenes work, talking with legislators one on one, and not necessarily needing to be so public about it. And for youth who do not feel encouraged enough to start doing that kind of work or do not feel safe enough to start doing that kind of work, I think it's important that you focus on your own mental health. I think that it's something where we shouldn't have to kind of take the lead on this. We shouldn't have to be, dealing with this problem at all. And so allowing yourself to take a step back, it's hard, but trying to kind of filter out social media and stuff like that, figuring out what content you do and do not like, and being able to filter out specifically political content that has to pertain to trans kids is important. And then it's one of those things too where I think that a lot of kids shouldn't have to be worrying about politics, and we are right now, trans and cis kids, especially those in marginalized groups. It's one of those things where it's like right now it's just crazy and unprecedented times. And so I think what I would say to kids who feel available to do advocacy, do it, do what you can. That could be through making art, that can be through, just posting your own story, that can be through talking to legislators one on one, to writing anonymous emails to legislators, doing, what you feel safest doing, possibly pushing your comfort zone a little bit, but making sure that you also feel safe because right now, like I said before, is crazy. There's a lot of crazy people out there that are not really willing to hear us out. And so being able to take a step back and being able to set boundaries for ourselves, being like, okay, I know that I'm not going to make progress with this person, so I'm just going to take a step back and not put in the effort to do that. I think that's a really important thing, kind of knowing when to cut people off, knowing when there's just not help to be had. And for kids who feel as though they cannot do, any advocacy for whatever reason, just kind of focusing on their own mental health, doing things that they enjoy, focusing on their future specifically with things like their career, school, college, if you're of age to start looking at college, just kind of focusing on your life rather than everything that's going on. And it's kind of hard to do that since a lot of the things that are going on are impacting our own lives, but focusing on the things that we can control.
I love that response. And I just have to tell you that when I met you and now, you've impressed me as an individual that is both self-aware and quite confident. And I know you talked about Skylar Baylor being one of the early individuals that you saw in your life that inspired you to step out and engage in public speaking and advocacy on behalf of trans people. But where do you think you get that confidence from, that really established sense of self from? Where do you think that comes from?
I think a lot of it honestly comes from the care that I have received, the medical care, kind of being able to feel happy in the body that I am in. I think that that's a huge part of confidence, is specifically the physical aspect of things, especially for trans youth, where small things kind of can be a massive boost or it can be a massive hit. Sometimes there are shirts that just feel really nice and you feel really confident in. I guess that for me, a lot of it is the physical body aspect of things. I guess for the speaking thing, it's just kind of, I've done a good amount of research, and I think a lot of the things that I speak about are about myself, and I know the most about myself in comparison to other people. So kind of being able to focus on that, being like, okay, I do and don't know these things, and I do know about myself, so I can use that. And that's a huge part of the advocacy that I do, is just talking about myself. It may sound a little self-centered, but I enjoy doing that. It's fun. It's nice to be able to talk about yourself. Channeling that, I think, has created created a lot of confidence in me, not only through advocacy and through my speaking, but also just day-to-day life. I feel a lot more confident now after I've started doing advocacy work.
So Stephen and I started the Parent Advocate podcast to talk directly to parents who were looking to better understand how to support their trans kid. My son Daniel has always talked about what a difference it made for him to have supportive parents from a very young age. What were things that your parents did that had a material impact on ensuring your success today?
So I came out to my parents through putting just a little note on my dad's. This was during COVID. I put a note on my dad's computer, his work computer, that just said read with mom, and it kind of laid everything out. And I remember the first thing I did, this was at like 2 a.m. that I wrote this letter, went to bed, woke up, booked it to the bathroom, immediately did not want to confront what I had just said, came back out, my mom said good morning, started crying, and then I think that one of the biggest things was kind of just her starting off being like, you're fine. This isn't anything to cry about. You're okay. Like, we will do what we can. We don't know anything at the moment, but we'll figure it out. And so a lot of it is just kind of being able to say, I don't know, but we're going to figure it out. We're going to do our research. We are going to use reputable sources for that research. And I think it's one of those things where it's like, a lot of it is kind of the confidence in not knowing, and which is interesting because you would think that it would kind of be the opposite, but kind of being able to say, we don't know, and being able to ask your kid, how are you feeling? What do you think is best? What do we want to do next? And kind of doing your research with the child, because the child is the one that is kind of in charge of this whole thing since it's impacting the kid the most. Being able to kind of go every step of the way with your kid is really important, and that's something that my parents both did really well, is kind of walking with me through this. And there's been like a lot of obstacles that we've had to go through, and kind of getting over those together as well, not just, you know, walking with me for the nice parts, but also coming with me for the not so great parts has been important. So a lot of it is just kind of listening to your kid and being able to say, hey, I don't really know what to do next, we're going to need to figure this out, and being able to confide in your kid for solutions while also being able to kind of take the lead where you feel your kid may not necessarily be comfortable.
So, love that. I always like hearing about the way youth share their identity with their parents and how they're received. And that story is really touching and heartfelt. And I want to ask you, beyond your parents, we here talk about community, the importance of community. Like, if there is one thing that I learned from Lisette, Jose, and Daniel, it's about the importance of surrounding their child with community, so that not only did they know they were supported inside of their family, but they recognized that they were part of a community of other gender expansive people, both younger, same age, and older than them, that they could see possibility models and they could see a future for themselves beyond what we necessarily are hearing about in terms of like the quality of life and the longevity of transgender people. So I'm curious, what does community look like for you where you and your family are?
At the moment, I think that it's important that we kind of have our separate communities that also kind of come together. My parents having a community of parents where they can kind of confide in, and then me having a community of other trans people that I can talk to and confide in is really important. For me, community right now just kind of looks like a group of friends. A lot of them are cis, a lot of them are trans. And so just kind of having like this group of multiple identities, like I guess intersectional identities would be the word that I'm thinking of, where there's just a mix of kind of everything. I think that it's important that communities, the people within them have things in common, but also have differences. Otherwise, it's just kind of an echo chamber, which can be really boring. And then I think that my parents' community looks, like I said, like a community of other parents with trans kids, as well as just kind of friends and family being supportive of them in their situation, and friends and family being supportive of me in my situation. I think a lot of community has to do with that aspect of family specifically, where it kind of feels like when you lose one support, it can be a lot. I luckily have not lost any support from any of my family. Like, I still have my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, all very supportive of me. And so for me, I think one of the biggest parts of community is being able for like my parents, my family, my friends to be like, oh, we're really proud of you and what you've done, and we're very excited for what you will do and will continue to do. So I think a lot of community is kind of being able to share the joy and the hardships that you have gotten out of whether it's being trans or just general hardship kind of stuff.
You're still in high school, but you're also doing a lot of activism that many trans adults might not have chosen to participate in, or maybe there wasn't a need in that moment. What do you do when you're doing this level of advocacy to take care of yourself and to make sure that you're still centering yourself while also being an additional voice to a movement that is still pushing for equality and freedom?
For me, I have a lot of downtime, which is surprising considering that I have high school and I have advocacy stuff, but I like being home alone and playing video games or something like that. A lot of the kind of like keeping to myself thing is just doing things that I would normally do otherwise. I guess that if we're talking if you are a very busy person, being able to kind of figuring out when to take breaks from the work that you are doing, figuring out what works for you in terms of do I like being alone? Do I like being with other people? What helps me to kind of refresh, to recharge my battery? For me, that happens to just be video games and scrolling on my phone and normal teenager stuff.
Right, because you're a normal teenager,
Hmm.
even though people will try to say otherwise. So, one of the things that I talked about in your intro when I was giving your bio was your interest in majoring in political science. And clearly, public policy already impacts your life in very real ways. But I'm curious, what do you think draws you to that field? And how do you imagine your advocacy evolving as you move into college and then into adulthood?
I think that the big draw to political science is kind of I think that I can continue my public advocacy through that field, and I think that it will give me not only a lot of like just general credibility having that degree, but also it will allow me to kind of learn just more generally about public policy and how it works. Once again, I'm still a kid, so I don't know everything about public policy, so kind of being able to figure out like everything would be very nice. And then also it's one of those things too where I think that political science is it's a pretty bendable kind of degree where there are general education classes that you do have to take, but you can also take more specified classes for the type of work that you want to do. So for me, I'll probably end up taking some gender studies classes, maybe debate classes or something like that, trying to figure out what will work best for me in terms of my type of advocacy. And then for advocacy in college, I'm thinking that what I'll do is I'll kind of try and bring some of my networks into college. So if I end up going to college in a different state, I will try my best to kind of weave in those people into the advocacy that I am doing, see if I can figure out any more connections, do internships and figure out like, okay, what public, politicians work best for me? Who can I work with? Who can I network the best with? Trying to figure out my career for the future as well as trying to get through college.
Yeah, I wanted to ask that. I'm curious because we are talking about advocacy, and there's obviously different types of advocacy. There's storytelling and public facing advocacy. There's people who are doing like community mutual aid work. What do you find lights you up the most? Daniel really loves, like, he'll do public facing advocacy, but for him, it's like the one on one kind of community space building. What makes you feel full?
I really love talking one-on-one with people. I think that that makes the biggest impact in terms of like actually bringing people along and allowing them to have an understanding, kind of having that individual talk, or at least in small groups where they can ask questions and feel comfortable in that because it's like, okay, other people aren't here. I can ask these questions and not feel judged by a whole room of people. It's one of those things too where you kind of get to know the person that you're talking to better. And I'm just saying that for me, I get to know the person that I'm talking to better. I get to understand where their questions are coming from and hear their story as well. And I think that that's really important in making connections, of course. It can't just be a one-sided kind of thing. There needs to be consideration of the person that you are talking to, not just kind of considering what you're going to say next. I enjoy the listening part of things, listening to other people's stories, kind of being able to build connection through that. Once again, I think that building that connection, having them know that I know about them, it creates a environment where they feel much more comfortable with me and where they feel much more vulnerable and where they can kind of figure things out a bit easier on both their end and my end.
Listen to this attentive listener. Like, that is a really important skill for someone who is interested in public speaking, is interested in going into any type of policy or advocacy space, being able to hear people. Like our political system, our current political climate would be so much more improved if people listened more and weren't so interested in trying to make their point or be heard or be right. That is such a critical skill. And the fact that you recognize that as an element of why you enjoy doing what you're doing speaks volumes. My goodness, so many adults could learn from you. And so, as we talk about unexpected advocates like yourself, parents, faith leaders, educators, people who may not necessarily see themselves as part of the movement, but whose voices matter, what do you wish adults understood about how to show up better for trans youth?
Kind of going back to your point about listening and not being so stubborn about your views. I think that that's seriously important. Being able to listen to others, whether or not they agree with you, and kind of, obviously, if something that someone is saying is kind of not great, being able to say, okay, I know this isn't going to work out. But then also kind of being able to be like, okay, where is this viewpoint coming from? I think that that's a hugely important part of advocacy. Unfortunately, due to kind of the rise in debate culture, getting angry at people is considered a loss, which it shouldn't be, because I think that there's a lot of times where people are very justifiably angry in the conversations that they are having. But figuring out that Zen place is really important, and figuring out, okay, I need to be able to listen to these people. I need to be able to listen to trans youth specifically and figure out how can I ask questions in a way that are respectful, and how can I have a better understanding for these people. And if I don't understand something, or if I think that something is wrong, trying to give my viewpoint in a way that is respectful towards that person. I think that the rise in debate culture, there's this massive idea where if you shift in your views at all, you have lost. And I think that that is important in advocacy, that you drop that. In advocacy, you cannot have a strict viewpoint that is never changing, because you are never going to make progress that way. I think that obviously there are certain viewpoints where it's like, okay, that's just not going to work for me, and that's okay. But if you start understanding where they are coming from, looking into that, if you fully do not understand, maybe trying to look into it a little bit deeper. I think that there needs to be just a general looking into yourself and kind of understanding, okay, where can I try and find understanding in this person's viewpoints? I'm kind of rambling a bit here. It's
I
fine.
know what you're saying. It's like finding common ground with people who you typically don't necessarily have a lot in
Mhm.
common with, or you don't necessarily see eye to eye with, so that you can agree on some things and move forward, as opposed to disagree on everything and be at a perpetual impasse.
Yes, exactly. Kind of treating it like, instead of how debaters debate, I guess, treating it kind of how, like, I guess scientists would debate, where it's like, okay, I'm proposing this theory. Here's my evidence to back it up. This other person is proposing their theory. They're using evidence to back it up, and kind of trying to find, okay, where do these places make sense? Can we make a new kind of understanding? And so I think that that's really important in advocacy, and is understanding the other side, understanding where they are coming from, as well as kind of having a deeper understanding of your side, and being able to have much more in-depth of an understanding than you would typically have when talking to like friends or family, trying to do a little bit more research before starting that advocacy. And I think that an important part of that is making connections with people, especially in terms of with the queer community, where it is a very very identity based thing.
So I live abroad. We moved, obviously, because we're from Arizona and we spent a
Right.
decade advocating. And I'm in the expat spaces, which are really just immigrant spaces, but they're filled with people who are not of color. And so the dialogue gets very diluted around civility, right? Like, how do we have a civil conversation around differences? I think what's really important about what you're saying is that you have capacity. That comes more from like a policy piece. How do I look at what you're telling me so I could create and draft policy that makes sense for all of us, right? Because policy is that space where we talk about civil liberties, where negotiation is necessary, right? And I talked to Daniel about this a lot too, because some of the things that you're saying remind me a lot about his point of view, or what he would say his POV, right? I will allow someone to ask me uncomfortable questions because I have capacity to answer them. I'm curious to know, as you move through your advocacy and as you move through and grow, in what ways do you kind of want to expand your viewpoint as well? Because Daniel has said, as he's begun to really focus on building the youth, the trans youth space he's building with Gender Lib, he's like, oh, some of the notions that I carried in my advocacy were dismissive of trans people of color because I'm white passing, or I view community in such a different way now. And these are things that I want to infuse. Like, as you begin to grow and create discourse, because that's what you're doing, right? Like, you're talking about engaging in debate, which it is a different kind of conversation. As you begin to participate in discourse, what are some of the things that you want to challenge? And what are some of the things that you feel challenged by as a trans person in the world?
Things that I want to challenge is kind of this notion of trans healthcare being unsafe for minors, as well as just in general. Going back to your point about specifically this like intersectional thing, I think that a huge part of the growth that I have kind of gone through as I've started my advocacy is understanding the importance of intersectional community specifically. You know, if we look back, like all the way back at Stonewall, which honestly wasn't even that long ago, we can see this exclusion of trans people of color. Marsha P. Johnson was excluded. Same with Sylvia Rivera, two trans women of color. And I think that it's important that we start including those people in a way where it's a lot less hard for them to feel included. I think that we still see this in a lot of trans spaces where they are very white dominant. And so being able to figure out, you know, how to include people in a way where it's like you are not making trans people of color always take the forefront, like no matter what, where you are not forcing them to do the activism for you, to find the solutions for you, but also in a way where you are allowing them to speak and you are allowing them to voice their issues and figure out how you can solve them together. And then going back to things that challenge me, I feel like that one's a little bit harder because I think about it a little bit less. For things that challenge me, I guess specifically kind of figuring out ways to negate people's concerns about specifically the medical care aspect of things. I think that there's a lot of research to back up the fact that trans healthcare is helpful. Of course, for trans youth, there is just a lot to back that up. But I think that it's harder for me to answer the questions of like, oh, well, like I heard that testosterone does this to the body. And then I'm like, well, that hasn't happened to me. So I don't really know what to tell you. And so I find it harder to negate things where it's like, I don't know enough about them and I haven't personally experienced them. That's kind of like a no duh type answer to the question. But I think it's something that's important to acknowledge where it's like, sometimes you just don't know. And that's time where you have to take a step back.
The
And
mama in me wants to tell you, as somebody who has been advocating next to my kid for a decade, you never have to answer medical questions. You don't have to know. You have a care team who does it for you, right? And like, how do we talk about the importance of access to care without constantly reducing ourselves to body parts? And I say that as somebody who had an abortion at 22 and had a miscarriage at 40 and had a child at 27. Like, I don't need to know how each of these things happened, right? I just know that I was able to access appropriate care that I needed at that time. And to reduce me to just my bodily functions is a way to keep me out of policy. And so
Can
this
I
mama
jump
just
in?
wants to tell you that.
The reason I want to jump in at this particular point is because of something that Brett, you said very early on, which was you invite these kinds of questions. And so I understand and appreciate your desire to want to negate an erroneous statement or something that you know from your own personal and lived experience is not harmful, but you can't really speak to the long-term effects of it because you are not even 20 yet, you know? And so it's like I can't talk about the harmful effects of testosterone over time because I haven't experienced them. But you can say there are hundreds of thousands of trans adults alive today who have not suffered from taking testosterone all of their lives. And so I can just look to the trans elders that exist to know that that's not a true statement. And so I like the fact that you're thinking about ways in which to have these conversations and engage, even though your own personal lived experience may not be steeped in experiential knowledge enough to answer the question, because you know that those elders exist. So
Look at us getting all annoying. We got all parental. We're like, hold on, Brett. Let us tell you
stop it.
something.
This is called the Parent Advocate Podcast. We will always be parental. But listen, advocacy can be, and is obviously in your case, deeply personal, especially when it's your own identity that's the subject of political debate. What gives you hope right now, even in the middle of all of this fuckery? I apologize to your parents for using that bad language with you, but you
they
understand what I'm
do
saying.
anyways, it's fine.
What gives you hope?
I guess Things that give me hope, I would say a lot of it is just kind of having that community around me to be like, oh, this sucks. You know, sometimes that's all you can say is just this sucks. I said before, echo chambers can be boring, but they can also be nice. Being able to talk to people that have kind of the same viewpoints as you, being able to be like, okay, this is stupid and here's why. And then them being like, yeah, I totally agree. And saying that exact same thing back. I think that that kind of gives me hope knowing that other people have the same viewpoints as me being like, okay, this is stupid. This is dumb. This is stupid and it sucks. Another thing that gives me hope, it's unfortunate that it took all of this crazy crap to happen for people to start turning the other cheek, but kind of seeing, I guess, a lot of people who were formerly MAGA Republicans be like, this is not what I voted for, even though it kind of is. This is not what I voted for. This was not what I necessarily wanted. Kind of seeing those people start to turn the other cheek, starting to see those people be like, okay, I get it now. I get why I was wrong. I get why people were saying this to me from the get-go and I should have listened. Once again, even though it takes all of this awful stuff to happen for that to happen, it happened. And I think that there's also a lot of stories that you can kind of find out there that it's like that aren't even related to trans people, where it's just a nice thing that happened. You know, seeing cute videos of animals online. It's nice to see that there are happy people out in the world and there are happy animals out in the world. Also, just kind of seeing trans-related stories where it's nice. It's a good thing that's happened. I remember seeing one clip where I believe it was a hearing, I don't remember exactly where, it was about trans healthcare. Somebody had come there to go against the idea of trans people being able to get healthcare, but they had heard all of these people speaking. He was like an older guy and he was just like, hearing these people speak today, I've been moved and I've changed my mind and I understand now. And so kind of little stories like that where it's like, it's one person, but it's still nice. It's nice to hear that, you know, even if it's just one person, it's likely a pretty mass change in viewpoint. So
as parents, Stephen and I often talk about how we learn from our kids. What do you think young people, especially trans youth, are teaching the world right now?
I guess that we have opinions and viewpoints, and we're not just working on college and high school and just school in general. We have lives where we care about stuff outside of our own little bubble. And we aren't just sitting here watching this happen and not feeling any way about it, because we definitely are. That doesn't just go for trans kids, that goes for kind of youth in general at the moment. I think a lot of people have very strong opinions, and I think that there's a lot of polarization right now. And I think that what trans youth specifically are teaching is that it's not really any of your business what's going on with my medical care. This is something where it is between me and my doctors, not something you specialize in. So you shouldn't really have an opinion on it to the extent that you have, because I think that a lot of the time kind of what happens is these legislators will inject their own reason for a problem into a universally held problem, where it's like, I am worried about my kid. And so they'll kind of inject this, oh, well, like trans people are rampant right now. They're trying to recruit your kid to like this crazy like Illuminati conspiracy type thing. And so I guess that what a lot of trans kids are teaching right now is like, that's not happening. These fears don't stem from the fact that there are trans people around. These fears stem from much bigger concerns. The like Epstein files are crazy right now. Like that's something that you should start worrying for with your kids, is the fact that there are predators in legislation right now. And I think that there's this massive movement of like, oh, well, there are like also Democratic candidates in the Epstein files. And it's like, we don't have like altars for these people. We don't praise these people. So if they are, it's a good thing that we know now. I guess what trans kids are teaching is like, there are much bigger concerns right now. My body is not your business, and leave us alone, because there are much bigger things happening in the world right now.
Preach. Brett, it was so lovely having you on today. I am so happy that we asked and you said yes. I wish you all the best in all of your future endeavors. I will be sure to check y'all out the next time I'm in.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Brett, and make sure to stay safe.
Thank you.
And tell your parents I said, what's up?
Okay, I will.
Now it's time for our recurring segment, Allies and Assholes, where we highlight individuals or groups who are supporting the LGBTQIA community on the one hand and call out straight up assholes who are trying to move us all backwards on the other. Lisette, who are we talking about today?
Well, Stephen, our ally of the week is not a stranger to this list, but we are so grateful to have her back on, Letitia James. Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, who won a multi-million-dollar judgment against the Trump Organization and who the DOJ has tried and failed 3 times to indict, showed up once again for victims of this administration's hatred. On Thursday, she posted a video in which she reaffirmed her support for transgender and gender expansive people, vowing to protect them within the borders of the state after the new proposed rule changes were announced by HHS. In her statement, she said, "Whether you live in Brooklyn, Binghamton, Buffalo, or anywhere else in New York, I will not let this administration come for you, your doctors, or your life-saving healthcare."
I just love Black women. I just have to say that right now. I just love me some Black women because notwithstanding all the crap that is heaped upon them and has been heaped upon them since the beginning of recorded time, you cannot and will not keep a Black woman down. And Letitia James is a shining example of this. This administration tried and failed 3 times to throw this woman in jail for some bullshit, trumped up, made up charges where they had to go dig through somebody's trash bin to find the semblance of an offense. Not only did it not stop her, but it showed that Black women have superpowers. And one of them is caring for other people and standing in the breach and protecting other people in times of crisis and need. And so I just love that she once again demonstrated just Black girl magic and just why we should all be bowing at the feet of Black women day in and day out.
100,000,000,000%. And this is why Letitia James is our ally of the week.
Congratulations to Queen Letitia James. Now on to our asshole of the week. Our asshole of the week goes to the clown car duo of RFK Jr. and Dr. Mehmet Oz. The clown car duo pushed out some rulemaking measures this week that will ban gender-affirming care for trans youth. These efforts are targeting Medicaid and Medicare, requiring that hospitals receiving federal funds preclude those hospitals from providing gender-affirming care to minors, such as puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and surgeries, which, again, as we said earlier, are extremely rare as a condition to receiving that federal funding. Listen, these 2 asshats held a press conference making the most wild and unsupportable claims about not only the surgeries, treatments themselves, but the cost of these treatments, which are performed, describing them as malpractice. And it's pure comedy to hear RFK Jr. speak about anything because he sounds like a meth head. And Dr. Oz, who was obviously smoking some shit because here was once a respectable individual who is now riding shotgun with this fucking horrible, wretched embarrassment of an administration.
I mean, he's a talk show host. I felt like I was watching Jerry Springer. Just gone. I miss the days of like serious government. Boring, serious government that employed experts and not talk show hosts. And yesterday's presser was horrifying. I think it was even more horrifying because people believe them.
Lisa, I honestly, I'm standing here at a loss for words because you said it all. Like, I can't believe that this is government. Like, these press stunts, these gimmicks are what passes for governance today. Motherfuckers are more worried about ratings than they are about actually competent governance. And this is why RFK Jr. and Dr. Oz are our assholes of the week. Well, that's our show for today, folks. I'd like to thank today's guest, Brett, for all of his insights. And of course, I got to give it up to my co-host, Lisette Trujillo, who is no longer suffering from her fever dreams, for holding me down on these airwaves.
Thanks for reminding me that it's a reality, Steven. But you know that since you just gave me a reality check, it's further proof that you are my ride or die co-host forever. And of course, we couldn't do this without all of you, our listeners. So thank you for tuning in to the Parent Advocate Podcast.
And folks, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast, Substack, and YouTube channels. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and do everything you've got to do to stay up to date with everything going on here at the Parent Advocate Podcast.
Goodbye.